There are houses that keep their grief the way misers keep their gold. Locked away, counted in silence, never spent. Ria Voss had learned that truth, not from philosophy, but from 3 years of sleeping in a servant's cot beneath the eaves of Ashmore Park, listening to the butler, Mr. Finch, walk the corridors each night with his taper. She had counted his footsteps without meaning to. 14 steps to the east passage. Pause. 7 to the branching stair. Pause. Then the soft, almost ceremonial tap of the candle holder against the newel post. Once, as if marking an attendance that no one but he would ever audit. She did not know in those first weeks that he had been doing it for 20 years. She did not know, then, what he was counting for. What she knew was cold. The kind of cold that settles into the joints and stays, that wool cannot reach, that no amount of burying her hands beneath the thin blanket could entirely correct. It was October, and the fires at Ashmore Park were lit only in rooms where Lady Maren Ashmore sat, or where Lady Maren entertained, or where Lady Maren's companions performed their necessary attendance. Ria was not a companion. She was, by the household ledger, an under-housekeeper. By Lady Maren's private accounting, she was something considerably less. "You have undercounted the linen order again," Lady Maren had said that morning, not looking up from her correspondence. The breakfast room was warm. Ria stood at its threshold, where the warmth stopped. 16 dozen instead of 18. "Do you do it deliberately, Miss Voss, to make my life more difficult, or is it simple incompetence?" Ria did not answer immediately. She had learned, in 3 years, that the answer Lady Maren wanted was not an answer at all, but a performance of contrition. Eyes lowered, hands folded, voice reduced to something appropriately small. She could perform it. She chose, this morning, not to. "The invoice from Caraway and Sons, which I have in hand, confirms 16 dozen was what your ladyship authorized in August. I have the document if you wish to review it." The silence in the breakfast room was particular. Lady Maren's 2 companions, both daughters of impoverished baronets who survived on Lady Maren's conditional generosity, did not breathe visibly. The footman by the sideboard examined a point on the far wall. "Leave the document," Lady Maren said at last, "and go." Ria left it. She walked back down the corridor toward the housekeeper's room, and she did not let herself think, yet, about her father's library, about the smell of vellum and pipe smoke, about the house in Wiltshire that had sold at auction for £3,200, not enough to cover the debts her father had not told her about before he died. She did not let herself think about any of that. Survival required a particular narrowness of focus, and she had become very good at being narrow. The housekeeper's room was barely large enough for a desk, a chair, and the standing shelf where Ria kept the household books. She sat, opened the current ledger, and began the morning's work. The coal account was short by 11 shillings. The kitchen garden expenditure was 40 pence over what cook had reported verbally. Somewhere in the entries for the previous fortnight, Lady Maren's personal account showed a transfer, £160, noted only as disbursement, personal, that did not correspond to any supplier invoice Ria had been given. She noted it in the margin in her small, even hand. She had been noting discrepancies of this kind for 6 weeks. They totaled now just under £900. She did not know what she meant to do with the knowledge. She knew only that the ledger was the one place in Ashmore Park that could not be told to lower its voice or leave the room. It was in this posture, bent over the desk, the morning light coming sideways through the single north-facing window, ink drying on her finger, that the front door of Ashmore Park opened, and the world she had organized so carefully tipped on its axis. She did not hear the carriage arrive. She heard, instead, the sudden total silence of the house, the cessation of the low-level noise that any occupied building makes, the footsteps and murmurs and the distant clatter of the kitchen, replaced by something that was not peace but suspension. Then Finch's voice in the entry hall, at a volume she had never once heard from him in 3 years. "Your Grace, we were not, that is, welcome, Your Grace. Welcome to Ashmore Park." Ria set down her pen. Your Grace meant a duke. There was only one duke with any connection to Ashmore Park, and it was a connection Lady Maren never discussed. The estate, Ria had gathered from the oldest of the kitchen staff, was not strictly Lady Maren's to occupy. It belonged, as it always had, to the dukedom of Crail. Lady Marin's late husband had been the Duke's second cousin. Some arrangement, the precise terms of which Rhea had never been shown, permitted Lady Marin's continued residence. The arrangement, apparently, was subject to review. She heard his footsteps in the hall. Even through the closed door of the housekeeper's room, she could distinguish them, unhurried even, carrying a weight that was not merely physical. The voice that followed was low enough that she caught only the shape of it, not the words, but the shape was enough. It was the voice of a man who did not raise it because he had no need to. Rhea stood. She straightened her dress, which was dark gray wool, plain and well kept, because she kept it so herself. She smoothed the ledger closed. And she waited, because whatever was about to happen would happen whether she opened the door or not. And she had learned, these 3 years, to choose her moments carefully. The door opened without a knock. He filled it in a way that had nothing to do with vanity. Cassius, Duke of Crail, was tall and spare and pale as chalk, with dark hair and the particular stillness of a man who has decided, some years ago, that movement itself is a form of concession. His eyes, gray, the precise gray of iron pyrite in morning light, went to the ledger on the desk before they went to her. Then they went to her. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the room, the single window, the standing shelf, the desk, the careful ordering of everything in it. His expression, if it could be called that, shifted by perhaps a degree. "You are the housekeeper," he said. It was not a question. "Under housekeeper," Rhea said. "Rhea Voss. I manage the accounts." "I know what an under-housekeeper manages." He stepped into the room, which immediately felt considerably smaller. "I want the household ledgers. All of them. Going back to the date of my cousin's death. Lady Marin's late husband had died 4 years ago. I have 3 years, Rhea said. The year prior is not in my custody. Where is it? Lady Marin's study, I believe." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the shelf. He looked at the closed ledger on the desk. "Show me what you have." It was not a request. Rhea had grown up in a house where requests were made, where please was a word her father used unironically, where civility was considered a form of intelligence. She did not resent the Duke's economy of language. She recognized it, in some part of herself she could not quite name, as a different kind of precision, the same instinct that made her own sentences come out flat and factual, because ornamentation cost something she did not have. She opened the ledger. He stood beside the desk and read, and he was the sort of reader who moved his eyes rather than his lips or his hands, who asked no clarifying questions for the first 10 minutes, who simply absorbed. Rhea stood slightly to his left and watched the room. The smell of him was wool and cold air and something faintly of wood smoke, as if he had come directly from a long journey, rather than from any room she would recognize as comfortable. "This notation," he said at last, and his finger, bare, long, without a ring, landed on the margin entry she had made that morning. "The £900 discrepancy. You flagged this. I flag every unsubstantiated transfer. How long have you been keeping this record?" 6 weeks. He straightened. He did not look at her with surprise. Exactly. She had the impression that surprise was a luxury he had trained himself out of. But something in the set of his jaw acknowledged the information as unexpected. "And Lady Marin is aware you maintain these notes?" "Lady Marin is aware I manage the accounts," Rhea said. "The marginal notations are my own practice. They are not submitted." "They will be," he said. "Submitted. Today." He was already moving toward the door. "Bring the ledgers to the library at 3 o'clock. All of them." He paused at the threshold. "All of them, Miss Voss." "Yes, Your Grace." He left. The room was, objectively, the same size it had been 10 minutes ago. It felt larger and emptier than it ever had. Rhea sat down. She did not allow herself the luxury of extended reflection. She allowed herself precisely the time it took to breathe in, hold, breathe out. The discipline she had developed in the weeks after her father's solicitor had read the will, and she had understood, for the first time, the real shape of her circumstances. And then she opened the ledger again and began to make a clean, indexed copy of every marginal notation she had entered in 6 weeks. Lady Marin found her at 11:30. She did not knock either, but her entrance was nothing like the Duke's. It was a sweep, a rustle of expensive cloth, a scent of French violet water, and a quality of outrage so long maintained it had become structural. "I am given to understand," Lady Marin said, closing the door behind her with a softness more threatening than a slam, "that His Grace has spoken with you." "He has. And that he has requested access to my household accounts." "He has requested the ledgers," Rhea said. "As it is his estate, I imagine the request will be met." Lady Marin's face, which was handsome in the manner of women who have never once questioned their entitlement to be found so, arranged itself into something that was not anger and not fear, but the precise intersection of both. "You will understand, Miss Voss, that there is a history here that precedes your employment. His Grace and I have an understanding, a long-standing arrangement regarding my tenure at Ashmore Park." She paused. "An arrangement that does not require interference from staff." Rhea looked at her. "I am the account keeper," she said. "I keep what is accurate. I submit what is requested. I don't interfere with arrangements that are not in the ledger." "Be very careful," Lady Marin said, and there was something cold and specific in her voice now. The chill of a woman who understood exactly how replaceable an under-housekeeper was, and how very many ways a letter of character could be withheld. "How you choose to position yourself in this." Rhea did not flinch. She had not flinched in 3 years, which had required considerable practice, and the practice held. "I will bring the ledgers to the library at 3 o'clock, she said, as requested. Lady Marin left without another word. The violet scent remained for a long time afterward, dissipating slowly, like a threat running out of reach. The library at Ashmore Park was the warmest room in the house. Rhea had been inside it exactly once before, to inventory the book collection, when Lady Marin briefly considered selling a portion of it, and she remembered the fire, the good fire, the fire of a household that used its wood without rationing it. She set the ledgers on the long table, all 6 of them, 3 years' work in brown calfskin, the indexed marginal notes folded and tucked into the first volume, and stood at the window while she waited. The Duke was not alone when he arrived. He came in with another man, slight and precise-looking, carrying a document case, a solicitor, from the look of him, or an auditor. Finch hovered in the doorway, uncertain in a way Rhea had never seen him. Finch, who had navigated 3 years of Lady Marin's tempers with the impassivity of a man who had seen worse, looked now as if the ground were slightly tilted. He caught Rhea's eye and looked away. "Leave us," the Duke said to Finch, and Finch left with something approaching relief. The next 4 hours were the most focused of Rhea's life, which was saying something. The solicitor, whose name was Mr. Colworth, from a firm in London, worked through the ledgers systematically, while Rhea sat across from him and answered questions. The Duke sat at the head of the table and did not speak unless he asked a question, and his questions were surgical. Not "what is this," but "when did this begin?" Not "can you explain," but "how long have you known?" He did not express, at any point, any view on what the numbers revealed. He simply consumed the information with that iron pyrite gaze and the stillness of a man composing something in his mind that he would not yet say aloud. By 7 in the evening, Mr. Colworth had compiled a figure. He set down his pen and looked at the Duke. 4 years, Your Grace. From the month of Lord Ashmore's death. The total is close to £14,200. Some of it is legitimately drawn against the terms of the arrangement, perhaps 3,000. The remainder is not covered by any instrument I can identify. £14,200. It settled over the room like smoke. "Miss Voss," the Duke said, "your marginal notes identified £900 in 6 weeks. Yes, Your Grace. If you had had access to the prior year's accounts." She thought about it. Precisely, the way she thought about everything. "Given the pattern in what I could see, the frequency, the entry method, perhaps another 3,000, possibly more." He nodded once. He looked at Mr. Colworth. "Proceed as discussed." Mr. Colworth gathered his papers, rose, and left. The Duke did not move. Neither did Rhea. "You knew the notations would matter," he said. "I knew the numbers were wrong," she said. "I didn't know what would be done about it." "Did you think anything would be done about it?" She considered the honest answer, which was no, and gave it. No, Your Grace. A long pause. The fire was extraordinary. She had forgotten. In 3 years of the north-facing room, and the insufficient wool blanket, and the economized coal, what a properly built fire felt like. What it was to have warmth arrive at the face as well as the feet. "How did you come to be here?" he asked, not unkindly. It was the most syllables she had heard him deploy in a single sentence, and they came differently, slightly less clipped. A question asked because he wanted to know the answer, not because it was necessary to the audit. She told him the short version. It took less than 2 minutes. Father, debts, the house, the auction. 3 years of reference letters she had assembled herself from acquaintances of her father's who remembered him fondly enough to help, and the employment agency, and Ashmore Park. She left out the part about the library in Wiltshire, about the smell of vellum and pipe smoke, about the fact that she had grown up reading the same Greek philosophers whose translations sat on the shelves 20 feet behind the Duke's head. Those details were not relevant to the account. He listened with the same quality of attention he had given the ledgers. "You were genteel," he said. It was not condescension. It was a fact being filed. "I was," she said. "I am less so now. The accounting has been useful." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile, and it lasted less than a second. "Yes," he said, "it has." The following morning, Lady Marin was presented with a formal notice from Mr. Colworth's firm. Rhea was not present for this, but she heard it, in the particular way that large houses carried sound when their inhabitants forgot that sound traveled, the cry of outrage, the several minutes of raised voices, and then the terrible quiet that followed when Lady Marin understood that Mr. Colworth had not come to negotiate. What happened over the next 12 days moved with a speed that large legal and social machinery rarely achieved. The arrangement governing Lady Marin's tenure at Ashmore Park was examined, found to have been drawn with terms Lady Marin had materially violated through the unauthorized disbursements, and suspended. Lady Marin was given 3 weeks to remove to her own property in Bath, a property considerably smaller and colder than Ashmore Park, which Rhea gathered from Finch was a circumstance Lady Marin found obscene. 2 of her creditors, apparently alerted to the situation through channels Rhea did not inquire into, presented their own claims. By the end of the fortnight, Lady Marin's social position, which had been the scaffolding around which 3 years of cruelty had been organized, had contracted to something much closer to its actual dimensions. She did not speak to Rhea again before she left. She swept out of Ashmore Park on a Thursday morning, as if the departure were her own choice, her chin set at the precise angle of a woman who has decided that dignity consists entirely of posture. Her 2 companions followed in a second carriage, pale and uncertain. Finch held the door. He did not bow quite as deeply as he might have. That same Thursday, the Duke asked Rhea to remain at Ashmore Park. He came to the housekeeper's room, her room, still, because it was the room she knew, and he stood in the doorway in the posture she had come to recognize as his resting state, upright, contained, taking up exactly as much space as he required and no more. "The household is in chaos," he said. "Or will be when the staff understand their situation. I need competent accounts management. You have Mr. Colworth. Colworth does legal instruments. I need someone who reads the domestic books as you read them." A pause. "I am staying at Ashmore Park for the foreseeable future. I require a proper housekeeper." Rhea looked at him. He had spent 12 days at Ashmore Park, and she had learned, in those 12 days, that his silences were not indifference but concentration, that he ate sparingly and without ceremony, that he worked until the household was long asleep and rose before it woke, and that he had not once, in 12 days, entered a room where she was working without pausing at the threshold first. As if, she thought, he had decided that her space was hers unless she opened it. "You would need to engage a proper housekeeper," she said, "someone with full credentials for the role." "That is not what I said." He was looking at her with that particular steadiness. "I said I need someone who reads the books as you do." The distinction mattered. She let it matter for a moment. "I will stay," she said, "on the condition that my authority over the accounts is explicit, in writing, that Lady Marin's practice, or any future occupant's practice, of restricting my access does not recur." He did not answer immediately. He appeared to be considering whether the condition surprised him. "Yes," he said, "in writing." "Then yes, Your Grace." He left. Rhea looked at the north-facing window, at the thin October light coming through it, and allowed herself the first full breath she had drawn in 3 years. Finch knocked on her door that evening. He was a small man, wiry, with hands that always seemed to be slightly too large for the rest of him, and he had the face of someone who has trained himself out of showing what he felt so thoroughly that the effort itself was visible. He held his candle holder in one hand. "I suppose you'll want an explanation," he said. She had not asked him for one. She had not, in 3 years, asked Finch to explain the nightly walk. She had assumed, as one assumes about private ceremonies, that it was not her place. But he had come to her door, and the candle holder was in his hand, and his face had an expression she had not seen on it before, which was the expression of someone about to put down something very heavy. "His Grace was married," Finch said, 12 years ago. She died in childbirth. The child too. They were brought here. This was her family's home, and His Grace went back to London, and I was left to keep the house ready, in case he came back." He paused. "He did not come back. Not until now." Another pause. "Every night, I counted the candles, left them lit, so the house would be ready." Rhea sat very still. "He stopped coming," Finch said, "and I stopped being able to stop. 20 years. Near enough. The habit outlasted the hope." He looked at the candle in his hand. "Last Tuesday night, I walked to the newel post and I did not tap it. I did not count. I just stopped." He looked up. "I thought you ought to know." "Why me?" Rhea asked. Finch considered this with the gravity he gave all things. "Because the house is different this week," he said, "and I think it knows why, even if I don't. Precisely." He left. Rhea sat alone in the housekeeper's room for a long time, listening to the absence of his footsteps. The arrangement that followed was formally a domestic employment, and in its formal structure, it remained so for 7 weeks. Rhea managed the accounts. Cassius, she did not think of him as the Duke in her own mind. She had not done so since the 3rd evening, when she had made an error in the coal tally and corrected it in front of him without embarrassment, and he had said nothing, which was, she had come to understand, his form of approval. Cassius directed the restoration of the estate to something closer to its proper functioning. New staff were engaged. 3 years of deferred maintenance was catalogued and, item by item, addressed. The library was opened, properly opened, fires and all, and she found herself in it on 2 evenings before she registered that she was returning to it by choice. On the 2nd evening, he was already there. He was reading, a history of some kind, from the spine, and he did not look up when she entered, which she understood was not rudeness, but an extension of the same courtesy as the threshold pause, the acknowledgement that the room was hers as much as his. She took a book from the shelf. She sat. They read for an hour without speaking. "You know Greek," he said at last, without looking up. She glanced at the title in her hands. She had not thought about it. She had reached for it the way one reaches for something familiar. "My father read it to me. The Stoics, mostly. Marcus Aurelius. And Epictetus. My father said Epictetus was more honest because he had less to lose." A long pause. "Your father sounds like someone I would have liked." The remark was so unguarded, so unlike the economy of everything else he said, that it sat in the room for a moment before she could answer it. "He would have liked you," she said. He admired directness. Cassius set his book down. He looked at her, and there was something different in the quality of it this time, something that had been accumulating, perhaps, for 7 weeks and was now simply visible, a steadiness that was not merely habitual but oriented, aimed. She felt it land. "Miss Voss," he said. "Rhea," she said, before she could decide whether to say it. He was quiet for a moment, with the quality of quiet she had learned to understand as processing, rather than discomfort. Then, "Rhea," her name in his voice sounded like something being recognized, rather than introduced. "I want to be plain with you. I prefer it." "I know." He set his hands flat on the arms of the chair. He did not look away. "What I am about to say is not an offer of further employment or an adjustment of arrangement. It is a personal statement that you are entirely free to disregard, without consequence of any kind to your position here. Understood, she said, though her chest had become a somewhat complicated place in the last 30 seconds. I have not wished to remain in any room longer than necessary for 20 years, he said. I have wished to remain in rooms you occupy. I find I think about the accounts because you manage them. I find I come to this library because I have noticed you come here. I am not skilled at this kind of declaration, and I suspect you can see that, so I will simply say, I would like, if it were agreeable to you, to court you, in the proper sense, as your equal in intention, if not in circumstance. Rhea looked at him for a long moment. The fire was doing what the fire in this room always did, burning properly, fully, without apology, and the light was on the side of his face, on the pale angle of his jaw, and the dark hair, and those gray eyes that were, she thought, probably the most honest thing about him. She thought about what Finch had said. The house is different this week. She thought about the north-facing window, and the insufficient blanket, and the cold that had lived in her joints for 3 years, and she thought about her father, and the smell of vellum, and the auction that had taken everything. And she thought about the ledger on the desk, and the 900 pounds in the margin, and the fact that she had noted it, because accuracy mattered to her, because it was the one thing no one could take, not Lady Marin, not debt, not loss, the thing that lived in the careful, even hand, and the flat, precise voice that did not beg. I am not interested in being rescued, she said. I want you to know that first. Whatever this estate represents, whatever the circumstance, I am not looking for a substitute for what was taken. I am looking for something different entirely, and I won't apologize for knowing the distinction. I know the distinction, he said. I am not offering rescue. I am not, if I am honest, capable of offering it. I have required a certain amount of it myself, lately, and from a fairly unexpected quarter. Rhea felt something loosen in her chest. An unexpected quarter, she said. That is one way to describe it. I am not good at the other ways. The corner of his mouth moved, that same fraction of a smile she had seen once before, which lasted longer this time. Rhea, will you allow me to try? She thought of Epictetus. He was more honest because he had less to lose. She had very little left to lose, and, it turned out, that made honesty considerably easier. Yes, she said, on the understanding that this is between people who manage their own affairs, not a transaction, not a kindness. A partnership, he said immediately, as if the word had been waiting. A partnership, she agreed. The room held that for a moment, the fire holding steady, the books on all sides keeping their silence, the house around them as settled and present as it had apparently not been in 20 years. Finch did not walk the corridor that night. He had not walked it since Tuesday. He told Rhea later, in his spare way, that he had found he simply did not need to, that the house was lit from within now, by something that required no candle, that the long vigil was over without ceremony or announcement, the way the best endings always are. The counting was finished. What had been held in suspension for 2 decades exhaled itself quietly into the October dark, and Ashmore Park, for the first time in a very long while, felt like a house where someone might actually choose to stay. Cassius stayed. Rhea stayed. The ledger she opened the following Monday bore her name on the inside cover, Rhea Voss, account keeper, Ashmore Park, and beside it, in a hand she recognized as not her own, because it was slightly less even, slightly less practiced, the word Crail, and then a date. She looked at it for a long time. She did not let herself think of the auction or the debts or the 3 years of cold. She let herself think only of this, the ink drying on the page, the fire in the room she had been given that faced south, the sound of his footsteps in the hall, unhurried even, pausing at her door. She said, "Come in." He came in. He sat in the chair she had placed beside the desk, because she had placed it there 3 days ago and he had sat in it without comment, as if it had always been there, as if it were simply accurate. They worked in the same room all morning, the accounts balanced. Outside, November was arriving with its particular gray, and the trees at Ashmore Park were losing the last of their color, and none of that mattered in the way it had mattered for 3 years, because the cold was no longer a permanent address. There are people who survive loss by making themselves very small, very accurate, very correct. And there are moments, rarer, harder earned, when precision does not contract but expands, when the ledger and the library and the flat, honest voice turn out to be not the consolation prize but the foundation. Rhea had built on narrower ground than most. What she built held. Perhaps you have felt something like it, the slow, almost imperceptible shift of a house around you, the way warmth becomes possible again, not because the cold has been defeated, but because someone has simply, finally, decided to stop economizing on the fire. If you have, then you already know what Rhea knew by the time she set down her pen that morning and heard Cassius say her name across a room that was theirs. And if you have not, then perhaps that is what stories are for, to light the corridor, to count the candles, to wait.